Silas Blackwood, a man whose corpulence was matched only by the vastness of his ego, surveyed the dusty town of Redemption Gulch with a sneer that was practically a fixture on his florid face. His gaze, cold and possessory, swept over the parched storefronts, the weary townsfolk, and settled, inevitably, on the distant, sprawling silhouette of Dust Devil Ranch. He wanted it. Not for its beauty, for Silas saw beauty only in balance sheets and demolition contracts, but for the whispers of untapped water and minerals that lay beneath its stubborn, unyielding soil. And standing in his way was Elias Thorne, an old man whose bones seemed as brittle as the dry twigs littering the ranch, and, more recently, a young black woman named Serafina, whose quiet presence beside the old rancher was an affront to Silas's ordered, prejudiced world. He'd seen Elias hand her for crumpled dollar bills in the dim, greasy light of the town's only diner, where Serafina had been scrubbing floors, her eyes downcast, her spirit seemingly as worn as the faded linoleum. Elias had muttered something about a fresh start, a debt paid, but Silas, ever eager to twist kindness into corruption, had bellowed for all to hear, "Well, looky here. Old man Thorne's finally bought himself some company." "What had she cost, Elias? For whole dollars? You drive a hard bargain, you old coot." The cruel laughter of Silas's sycophantic companions had echoed Elias's quiet dignity and Serafina's pained silence into insignificance. Silas believed he understood the transaction perfectly, a desperate old man, a cheap acquisition. He couldn't have been more disastrously wrong. He never imagined that this frail old man, with his threadbare coat and calloused hands, or this silent young woman, whose resilience was a constant, unspoken rebuke to his sneering disdain, would ever possess the power to dismantle his gilded empire. He truly believed those $4 were the sum of their worth, a pathetic token in a world he owned. What was to unfold would not just shock him, it would obliterate the very foundations of his arrogant existence, proving that the deepest wells of strength often lie hidden beneath the most underestimated surfaces. The injustice of that moment, the public humiliation of Serafina, the condescending dismissal of Elias, these were the seeds of Silas Blackwood's spectacular undoing, watered by his own venomous hubris. He was a man accustomed to taking, to crushing, to bending the world to his will, and the idea that these two insignificant specks of humanity could resist him was, to his mind, utterly preposterous. The thought was so absurd, it was almost comical, and he chuckled, a low, guttural sound that promised future torments for those who dared to defy him. Silas Blackwood, never one to let an opportunity for public humiliation pass, decided to accelerate his acquisition of Dust Devil Ranch. His methods were as crude as his manners. He began by spreading insidious rumors. Elias was senile, a danger to himself. The young woman, Serafina, was a grifter, manipulating the old fool. He spoke loudly in the general store, his voice dripping with false concern, about how the ranch was falling into disrepair, how it was an eyesore, a blight on the community he so generously planned to develop. His cronies, a gaggle of yes-men and local opportunists who orbited him like scavenger birds, nodded in vigorous agreement, their eyes gleaming with reflected greed. To cap his campaign of coercion, Silas announced a grand community appreciation barbecue to be held on a plot of land he'd recently acquired, strategically bordering Dust Devil Ranch. Invitations, ostentatious and reeking of expensive cologne, were sent to every influential figure in the county. His true intent, however, was far from appreciative. He planned to publicly corner Elias, to make him a ridiculously low offer for the ranch in front of everyone, framing it as an act of benevolent charity. "We'll see how the old buzzard and his $4 filly handle a bit of public pressure," Silas had chortled to his associate, a weaselly lawyer named Mortimer Finch, whose smile never quite reached his eyes. "He'll be begging me to take it off his hands by the time I'm through." Meanwhile, on Dust Devil Ranch, a different kind of industry was afoot. Serafina, far from the listless waif Silas had painted her as, moved with a quiet efficiency that belied her youth. She mended fences with surprising strength. Her hands, though slender, were deft and capable. She coaxed a small vegetable garden back to life near the old farmhouse, her touch gentle, her knowledge of the soil seemingly innate. Elias watched her, a flicker of something profound, respect, perhaps, or a long-held hope, in his faded blue eyes. He said little, his gaze often distant, as if listening to echoes from the past, but there was a new resolve in his stooped shoulders. The townsfolk, swayed by Silas's relentless slander and the allure of his promised prosperity, whispered and pointed whenever Elias or Seraphina came to town for supplies. The air grew thick with unspoken judgment, with the heavy anticipation of Silas's inevitable triumph. He was, after all, Silas Blackwood. He always got what he wanted. His hubris was a blinding force, rendering him incapable of seeing the quiet storm gathering on his horizon, a storm named Seraphina, a reckoning named Elias. The day of the barbecue dawned hot and merciless, the sun beating down on the assembled crowd as if to mirror Silas Blackwood's own oppressive presence. He stood on a makeshift stage, resplendent in a gaudy western shirt, his voice booming through a crackling microphone. He extolled his own virtues, his vision for a new redemption gulch, before finally turning his attention, with a predatory gleam in his eye, towards the edge of the crowd where Elias and Seraphina stood, isolated but unbowed. "And now," Silas declared, his voice dripping with mock sympathy, "I want to talk about a neighbor. A man who's seen better days. My good friend, Elias Thorne." A smattering of polite, uncertain applause rippled through the audience. "Elias," Silas continued, gesturing grandly, "your ranch, Dust Devil, well, it's seen better days too. So, as a gesture of goodwill, of community spirit, I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 for it. Cash. Take it, old man. It's more than it's worth. Enough for you and your young ward to find a comfortable place somewhere else. Before you both end up with nothing but dust." The offer was an insult, a fraction of the land's true potential, and Silas knew it. He waited for the expected gratitude, the broken acceptance. Instead, Elias Thorne, looking impossibly frail yet radiating an undeniable inner strength, slowly made his way to the stage. He didn't take the microphone. He simply stood there, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, then settling on Silas. "Mr. Blackwood," Elias's voice was raspy but clear, "you misunderstand a great many things. But your most grievous misunderstanding concerns this young lady." He turned and gestured to Seraphina, who now stepped forward, her initial trepidation visibly transforming into a profound, calm courage. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the timid murmur Silas remembered from the diner, it was resonant, infused with a power that captivated the suddenly silent crowd. "My name," she began, her chin held high, "is Seraphina Washington. And this ranch, Mr. Blackwood, this Dust Devil Ranch, half of it already bears my family's name. For my grandfather was Jedediah Washington, Elias Thorne's original partner on this very land." A collective gasp went through the audience. Silas's smirk faltered, a flicker of disbelief crossing his features. Seraphina continued, her voice gaining strength, "Jedediah Washington was swindled out of his rightful share decades ago, Mr. Blackwood. By your father, Cyrus Blackwood." The name hung in the air, heavy and damning. "Elias has spent 50 years searching for my grandfather's descendants to right that wrong. That for dollars you so publicly mocked? That was Elias giving me the last of his cash when he found me, newly arrived in this county, having just escaped a situation of profound exploitation. It wasn't a purchase. It was a lifeline, a symbol of a new beginning, freely given, freely received. It was the first act of kindness I had known in a very long time." The slow-motion reveal of this truth was like a physical blow to Silas. His face, moments before suffused with arrogant triumph, began to pale. Elias, his eyes now shining with unshed tears of pride and vindication, nodded slowly. The hidden power was not just in Seraphina's lineage, but in the unshakable truth they were about to unleash. Seraphina, her composure absolute, then reached into the simple cloth bag she carried. From it, she withdrew a worn, leather-bound satchel. The silence was so profound that the creak of the old leather seemed to echo across the stunned assembly. "My grandfather, Jedediah," she stated, her voice unwavering, "was a meticulous man. He kept records with deliberate care." She laid out several documents on the rough wooden table Silas had intended for signing away Elias's legacy. First, a faded but clearly legible partnership deed, dated over 60 years prior, bearing the signatures of a young Elias Thorne and an equally young Jedediah Washington, for the joint ownership of Dust Devil Ranch. Next, a series of letters, their paper yellowed with age, detailing Jedediah's increasingly desperate attempts to get Cyrus Blackwood to honor their informal agreement for Cyrus to buy out Jedediah's share at a fair price, followed by correspondence showing Cyrus's duplicitous maneuvers, the false promises, the ultimate, cruel betrayal that left Jedediah penniless and broken. Then, Serafina produced an old, sepia-toned photograph. It showed two young men, one white, one black, their arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning broadly, standing proudly on the very land Silas now coveted. The resemblance to Elias was unmistakable, and the strength and hope in Jedediah Washington's young face was a poignant testament to what had been stolen. But the legacy of deceit didn't end with your father, Mr. Blackwood. Serafina's gaze locked with Silas's, now wide with dawning horror. She produced a sheaf of modern geological surveys, commissioned months ago by Elias. These surveys, which Elias Thorne quietly arranged, reveal that Dust Devil Ranch sits atop one of the largest untapped aquifers in this state, along with significant deposits of rare earth minerals. Minerals you knew about, Mr. Blackwood, through illicitly obtained preliminary reports. Minerals you intended to acquire for a pittance by preying on an old man you believed to be alone and vulnerable. Elias finally spoke, his voice resonating with decades of suppressed grief and righteous anger. For 50 years, Silas, I've carried the weight of what your father did to my friend, my brother. I searched for Jedediah's kin, to restore what was stolen. That $4 I gave Serafina? It was a welcome, a small comfort as she began her new life, the life your family's greed almost denied her ancestors. And as for Dust Devil Ranch, Elias's voice rose, I am today, formally and irrevocably, ceding my remaining half to its rightful co-owner, Miss Serafina Washington, heir of Jedediah Washington. As if on cue, a sharp, intelligent-looking woman, Maria Sanchez, a lawyer from the state capital whom Elias had discreetly engaged, stepped forward. She carried a briefcase, from which she produced a stack of perfectly notarized documents, transferring Elias's share and affirming Serafina's inherited claim. All legally attested and filed with the county registrar this morning, Mr. Blackwood, Maria announced crisply. The crowd erupted. Silas Blackwood, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, swayed as if he'd been physically struck. The irrefutable proof, laid bare under the harsh sunlight, was a judgment delivered before the entire community he had sought to impress and dominate. The unraveling of Silas Blackwood was as swift as it was spectacular. The reporters, not just from the local paper but from several regional news outlets, all quietly alerted by Maria Sanchez and a now surprisingly tech-savvy Elias, swarmed forward, microphones and cameras thrust towards the collapsing magnate. Silas, usually so glib, so full of bluster, could only stammer denials, his words hollow against the mountain of evidence Serafina and Elias had presented. His carefully cultivated image of a benevolent patriarch, a community builder, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. His so-called influential friends, the county commissioners, the bank managers, the fellow developers who had basked in his reflected power, now edged away, their faces studies in sudden disassociation. Whispers turned into loud condemnations. The story of the historic swindle, coupled with Silas's current predatory attempts to acquire the mineral-rich land, spread like wildfire. Maria Sanchez, with surgical precision, then revealed further findings from her investigation into Blackwood's dealings, a pattern of fraudulent land acquisitions across 3 counties, significant tax evasion schemes, and even witness tampering related to a previous, hushed-up lawsuit. Her calm, factual delivery was more damning than any shouted accusation. Within hours, Blackwood Holdings stock began a precipitous plummet. Creditors, spooked by the public disgrace and the specter of massive legal liabilities, started calling in their loans. The empire built on arrogance and deceit began to crumble. Silas, attempting to bluster his way off the stage, found his path blocked not by reporters, but by 2 uniformed state troopers and an investigator from the Attorney General's office. The charges read out were serious: fraud, conspiracy, tax evasion. The click of handcuffs around his thick wrists was the loudest sound in the suddenly hushed arena. His face, contorted in a mask of apoplectic rage and disbelief, was a portrait of a tyrant brought low by the very people he had sought to crush. The sycophants who had laughed so cruelly at Elias's $4 purchase were now themselves objects of scorn, their faces burning with shame as they tried to melt into the background. The townsfolk of Redemption Gulch, many of whom had harbored doubts or even participated in the mockery, now looked upon Elias and Seraphina with a mixture of awe and profound respect. The quiet dignity of the old rancher and the young woman had proven more powerful than all of Silas Blackwood's wealth and bluster combined. His downfall was not merely financial or legal, it was total, a public demolition of a reputation built on sand and sustained by fear. In the months that followed, the dust truly settled on Dust Devil Ranch, but it was a dust of renewal, not decay. Under Seraphina's visionary guidance, and with Elias's wisdom as her constant support, the land began to transform. The first act was symbolic yet deeply resonant. The ranch was officially renamed Thorn Washington Legacy Ranch. Seraphina, it turned out, possessed more than just an ancestral claim. She had a degree in sustainable agriculture from a prestigious university, a fact she'd kept hidden during her period of hardship, knowing it would invite disbelief or unwanted attention. Now, she poured her knowledge and passion into the rich soil. The aquifer, once a secret known only to schemers, was now managed responsibly, irrigating fields that bloomed with diverse, drought-resistant crops. She implemented innovative soil regeneration techniques, and soon, parts of the ranch that had looked barren for decades began to show vibrant green. Elias, his face softer, the lines of worry eased, watched her with a grandfather's pride. He found a profound peace in seeing Jedediah's legacy not just restored but flourishing in the capable hands of his granddaughter. Together, they used a portion of the initial income derived from the ethically managed mineral rights, a stark contrast to Silas Blackwood's intended strip mining, to establish the Jedediah and Elias Foundation for Rural Justice. Its mission was clear: to provide legal aid, educational scholarships, and small business grants to marginalized individuals and families in rural communities who had faced exploitation, discrimination, or had been cheated out of their land or livelihoods. The old ranch house, once a symbol of stoic endurance, became a hub of activity. Workshops on sustainable farming, community meetings, even a small library and learning center for local children, breathed new life into its sturdy walls. Thorn Washington Legacy Ranch was no longer just a piece of property, it was a beacon, a testament to resilience, integrity, and the enduring power of justice. Seraphina, once the target of cruel mockery over for crumpled dollars, now stood as a respected leader, her quiet strength inspiring everyone she met. She proved that true wealth was cultivated, not stolen, that real power was shared, not hoarded. The triumphant resolution was not merely the defeat of an enemy, but the blossoming of a beautiful, life-affirming future from the ashes of past injustice. The laughter that now echoed across the ranch was joyful, innocent, and filled with the promise of generations to come. Silas Blackwood, stripped of his ill-gotten gains and confined to a sterile prison cell, learned a brutal lesson, one etched in the silent, unforgiving hours of his incarceration: true wealth is not tallied in stock portfolios or acres of land, but in the unshakable currency of dignity, the enduring legacy of integrity, and the quiet courage to stand unwavering for what is intrinsically right. He had looked upon Seraphina Washington and seen only a black girl, a commodity to be exploited, a pawn in his avaricious games. He had looked upon Elias Thorn and seen only a senile old man, an obstacle to be bulldozed. His prejudice, as vast and barren as the wasteland he sought to create, had blinded him to their true identities. Elias, the faithful guardian of a sacred promise, a man whose patience was a weapon forged in the fires of long-held grief, and Seraphina, the rightful heir, a woman of formidable intellect and indomitable spirit, whose resilience was the quiet thunder before the storm of justice. That paltry sum of $4, which Silas had brandished as a symbol of their supposed worthlessness, became, in the grand, ironic arc of fate, the very cornerstone of a new empire, an empire built not on exploitation, but on compassion, not on greed, but on restoration. For within every soul dismissed by arrogance, within every spirit underestimated by prejudice, there resides a wellspring of hidden strength, a profound truth patiently awaiting its moment of revelation. The world, in its ignorance and its cruelty, may seek to define you by its narrow, hateful terms, to diminish your light with its shadows, but your inherent worth, your unassailable dignity, is yours alone to claim, to nurture, and to unleash. Remember this story, the tale of Elias, Seraphina, and the $4 that shook an empire of greed. For the seeds of justice, no matter how long they lie dormant, no matter how deeply buried beneath the weight of oppression, will inevitably feel the warmth of truth, and they will always, always, find their season to bloom, transforming the landscape of despair into a garden of hope. Let their triumph be a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to rise, to reclaim, and to rebuild, proving that the most formidable fortunes are those of character, and the most lasting victories are those won for the soul.